Oil, the lifeblood of industrialized nations. 33% of all the energy in the world can be traced back to this crucial commodity. In today's video, we break down the future of the crude market and look into the possibility of a historic oil shock, one whose ripple effects could have severe consequences for consumers around the world. Before we begin this video, I need you to understand one thing: the Ukrainian conflict. As you probably know by now, Russia has launched an all-out invasion into Ukraine. Now, we've seen wars in the past. The US has invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. Syria has been an ongoing war zone for over a decade, and even oil-rich Kuwait suffered an invasion from Iraq in the early 90s. But none of these events can compare to what is happening right now as you watch this video. If you were not aware, even before the geopolitical troubles began, there were serious issues in the oil market. Due to a number of reasons, oil inventories around the world were flashing red. There just wasn't enough oil supply to cover oil demand. This caused prices to slowly soar, with the cost of a barrel going from about $40 in late 2020 to about $80 right before these recent developments with Russia came to light. In fact, many experts were predicting record prices even before anyone knew that Russia would choose to invade Ukraine. Yesterday, right before the aggression, Sadat al-Husseini, former Saudi Aramco EVP, went on CNBC to talk about oil prices. His insight lays the foundation for what is to come. Take a listen to his analysis, and then afterwards, I'll explain why the situation now is a catastrophe.
Sadat, always good to have you. Give me your take on global oil prices right now, given obviously the hostilities between Russia and Ukraine, the potential for more coming. What are we going to see?
Well, good morning, David. Yeah, it's quite dramatic. I hope we don't see any squeeze on oil supply. It hasn't happened yet. I think the price escalation is mainly financial, but you also have the same problem with gas. LNG is running at $24 per million BTU in Europe and in the Far East, whereas normally it would be $4 or $5. So it's across the board. OPEC is going to continue producing, and the market supply is continuing to be abundant. The Europeans, however, have to figure out how to deal with their own shortfalls. They have not built any inventory in gas. They have very little inventory in products, and they have to try to sort out their volumes. This is where the real problem is.
Sadat says something incredibly important there. The price escalation is mostly financial. You see, right before the troops were sent across the border, the oil price was around $92 a barrel. This price, according to him and many others, was a reflection of pure economics with maybe a sprinkle of risk added to it. What I mean by this is that before the invasion began, there was no unexpected disruptions to the worldwide oil supply. The price was a reflection of simple economics, supply and demand. This brings me to my next point. Russia is the third largest oil exporter in the world, supplying 10% of the planet. Europe especially relies heavily on Russian crude, but now with this shocking move by Putin, disruptions are essentially guaranteed. Not only can pipelines and oil facilities become damaged in the war, the broader impact of sanctions will cripple the worldwide supply. Any day now, Russia will be punished economically by the West. Leaders will presumably ban the use of Russian crude. This will tighten the already tight supply, and with demand set to explode in the spring, the price of the barrel may reach new record highs. OPEC and other large suppliers are unlikely to make up for the vast difference, and unless the West bows down to Russia, allowing it to continue its actions unpunished, the situation will likely turn ugly. But there is hope. Richard Brons, co-founder and head of geopolitics at Energy Aspects, claims that sanctions on Russian crude are unlikely. Take a listen to his unique analysis.
I think the two things to bear in mind you've kind of touched on. One is that both crude oil and European gas markets were already very tight before this crisis started. So we're a lot more sensitive to geopolitical risk than we would be in a well-supplied or an oversupplied market. Second thing is, as you picked up in the opener, we don't think you're going to see direct sanctions targeting Russian energy exports, and we don't think Russia's going to deliberately halt those energy exports. So a bit of an upward move makes sense, but also the fact it's not a huge upward move, given I think those direct risks remain low, even if this crisis and the military side of it escalates further from the events we've seen overnight.
In the end, the situation could not be worse for American consumers. With the price of a barrel now above $100, gasoline in the US has skyrocketed to an average of $3.53 per gallon. Now, the pain at the pump does not end there. It trickles down into many other spots. Energy, goods, and services, a category of which gasoline is a major component, accounts for roughly 7.5% of the overall CPI. Basically, if gas goes up a lot, inflation readings suffer, and if inflation readings suffer, the Fed is cornered into an even tougher situation. There have been calls already made that rate hikes are now unnecessary, and if true, that would likely mean one thing: stagflation. Elarian wasted no time jumping on CNBC today to explain what the Fed's next move might be. Take a listen.
What would you anticipate the next move being from the Fed in that case?
So this takes 50 basis points completely off the table. It takes the 8-9 hikes that a lot of people were talking about for this year off the table, and thankfully so, because you heard me say on your show that I didn't think the U.S. economy could accommodate and live with such slamming of the brakes of monetary policy. It means the Fed is going to have to be even more careful, and it's going to have to tolerate higher inflation. Nobody wanted to be here, but we were already far away from the world of first best in terms of monetary policy, and now we're going to go get even further away. So we're going to have a very sort of unsatisfactory situation when it comes to inflation and when it comes to growth, unfortunately.
Mohammed, I've had very smart investors explain to me that when you're dealing with inflation as high as we have it already, at 7% plus, that you're already at the point that the only way to resolve this inflation picture is to put the economy into a recession. Do you disagree with that?
So historically, that's been the case. Historically, when inflation gets this high and the Federal Reserve has lost its inflation credibility and has lost the policy narrative, they are forced to slam on the brakes. So historically, that's been absolutely correct. The question right now is, would they do that in the midst of a geopolitical shock? I put out an article in the Financial Times earlier this week, and I said, when you look at the probability, it's pretty even between whether they slam on the brakes or alternatively, they tolerate higher inflation and just push the problem down the road. This, we've talked about this over and over again. This is the situation everybody was afraid of, that by being late, you have fewer policy options.
As you just heard there, Mohammed believes there is a good chance that the Fed will have to learn how to live with higher inflation readings. Peter Schiff often infuriates people with his belief that the Fed will do nothing to harm the markets, even if it means extremely high inflation. Now it seems that Mohammed is taking that stance as well. In the past, politicians were prepared to crash economies in order to save currencies, but now it seems that they would rather inflate the currency and save stock prices. We've mentioned on this channel dozens of times how Paul Volckers no longer exist. Nobody is prepared to jack up rates and put the economy into a government-induced recession. Politicians and economists would rather use every excuse in the book to keep the rate at zero, even if it means double-digit CPI numbers. As always, thank you guys for watching. Please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed it. Also, I just want to take a moment and disclose something I've disclosed previously when talking about crude oil. Back in late January, I entered a 5-digit bullish USO leap position that I'm holding to this day. So when I'm talking about crude markets, keep in mind that none of this is financial advice, and I'm openly long crude for the foreseeable future. As always, I'll be as transparent as possible, especially if I have a particular position that may sway my creative direction.